My father asked me to give up my bonus for the third time this year so my brother could grow into the corner office, without me making him look small. Nobody at Callaway Air knows whose signature has covered payroll for 36 months straight. Surprise, Dad, it's mine. He said it over coffee, in the same chipped Callaway Air mug he's used since 1994, not even looking up from a maintenance report. 90 seconds. That's how long it took him to ask me to sign away an $11,000 bonus for a man who still calls me the pilot at Thanksgiving. Like I'm good china brought out for holidays and put back in the cupboard after. I said yes, I always say yes. I have a very good reason for saying yes, and nobody in my family knows what it is, and that is the entire problem. Callaway Air is 44 years old this spring. My grandfather built it out of 2 second-hand Cessnas and a hangar lease in Denver he paid for by selling his truck. Walton Callaway used to say the company ran on 2 things, fuel and stubbornness, and he was right about both. My father inherited it. My brother, Tucker, was raised to inherit it after him. I was raised to fly it, which in my family has always meant something slightly smaller than owning it. No matter how many hours I log or how many storms I bring a plane down safely through. When Tucker finished his MBA, my parents took out a full page in the Denver Business Journal to congratulate him. When I earned my air transport pilot certificate, the hardest rating in commercial aviation, fewer than 4% of pilots ever get there, my mother asked if that meant I'd finally stop working nights. There's a light in Hangar 2 that's burned every night since before I was born. Grandpa Walton started it, one lamp left on over the old dispatch desk until the last flight of the night is confirmed down safe, so a crew coming in late from a bad leg can see it from the runway and know somebody's still awake for them. My father let it go dark for 2 years after Grandpa died. I'm the one who called the tower every single night from wherever I was flying, Tucson, Fargo, once from a hotel room in Reykjavik, until the night crew just started leaving it on without me having to ask anymore. It still burns every night. Nobody in my family has ever once asked me why I care so much about a light bulb. They'd care a lot more if they knew what it actually costs me to keep some other things burning. 3 years ago, Callaway Air came within 6 weeks of missing payroll. I know because I was the one who covered it. The first wire, and everyone since. My family thinks a mystery investor swooped in during the worst quarter in company history and quietly kept the lights on. They've spent 3 years being grateful to a stranger. They just don't know the stranger sits at their dinner table, getting told to smile less about her flight bonus. The rescue money doesn't move under my name. It moves through a trust I set up the week everything nearly collapsed, called Lightkeeper Holdings, administered out of a boutique aviation finance firm in Boston I have never once visited in person. It's blind on their end too. That part was my idea. I didn't want some analyst in Boston hearing the name Callaway and putting it together over drinks with someone who golfs with my father. So even the people managing my own account only know me as trustee. Case number 4471. For 3 years, every wire, every covenant waiver, every quiet correction that's kept this airline solvent has come back with a 2-line note signed only GV. I don't know his first name. I don't know if GV is even a man, except that the notes read like one, dry, exact, occasionally infuriatingly kind. Last spring, after I authorized a de-icing fund increase 2 weeks before our own board had even voted on it, GV wrote back 4 words. Most people wait to be told the plane is already grounded. You didn't. I have read that sentence more times than I would ever admit to a living person. 6 weeks ago, a man named Griffin Voss walked into our ready room at 6 in the morning holding gas station coffee, introduced himself as the new director of flight safety and operations, and asked me, before he'd even set his bag down, why Hangar 2 kept a light on all night when every other hangar went dark at 10. Nobody asks that, nobody's ever asked that. I told him it was a company tradition, which was true and also nothing. He looked at me a second too long, like he already suspected the real answer was bigger than tradition, and then he let it go. I liked him for letting it go. I have spent my whole life around people who push exactly as far as it profits them and not 1 inch further. Griffin didn't push. He just filed it away, the way a good investigator files away every loose thread until the day it matters. He told me later, over stale pretzels at midnight during a ground stop in Amarillo, that corporate had sent him to run an operational review ahead of a fleet modernization vote, some new capital tranche the board would need to approve within the year. He didn't say whose capital. I didn't ask. I've learned the fastest way to keep somebody from digging into your secrets is to be too polite to dig into theirs. You fly like someone's watching, he told me that night. Half a smile, no flirtation in it at all, which somehow made it worse. Not nervous watching. Like you already know they are, and you decided a long time ago you weren't going to give them anything to see. I didn't have an answer for that, I still don't. The trouble started for real on a Tuesday, when my father called a family dinner and told us he had a heart procedure scheduled for November, a valve replacement, routine these days, he said, and that he wanted the succession settled before he went under. 45 years of Callaway Air, and he wanted to know who'd be signing the checks if he didn't wake up. He didn't look at me when he said it, he looked at Tucker. You'll be ready by the gala. Our 45th anniversary is in October. Black tie, half the regional aviation board, every reporter who's ever written the word turboprop. Dad's been planning to announce Tucker as the new CEO from that stage since Tucker was 9 years old, and asked for a toy control tower instead of a bike. My mother reached over and patted my hand like I'd won a participation ribbon. You'll always have your wings, sweetheart. Not everyone needs to run things too. I have logged 9,000 flight hours. I have flown this airline's aircraft through wind shear that grounded 3 competitors in the same week. I once diverted a full regional jet around a supercell with 11 minutes of warning, and got a fruit basket from corporate instead of a raise. Not everyone needs to run things too. Tucker didn't even wait for my mother to finish. Come on, Nora, don't make this weird, he said, not looking up from his phone. You're a great pilot, nobody's saying you're not. But running an airline isn't flying a plane, it's a whole different animal. He smiled at me the way you smile at a dog that fetched the wrong stick. Stay in your lane, please. I smiled back. I've gotten very good at that particular smile. It costs me nothing and tells them nothing, and every time I do it I think about $11,000 and 36 months and a light that's still burning in Hangar 2 because of me. 9 days after that dinner, Griffin rode the jump seat on my Aspen run as part of his operational review, and a mountain wave hit us on final approach without enough warning for anyone's comfort. The airport sits at almost 8,000 feet, boxed in by terrain that turns a bad gust into something with teeth. We picked up a 60-knot shift in under 4 seconds, the kind of thing that puts lesser pilots into a go-around they don't recover cleanly from twice. I felt the airplane want to weather vane hard right and put it back where I needed it before the stick shaker even finished its first cycle. Nobody in the cabin felt more than a hard bump, that's the whole job, making the violent thing look like nothing happened. Griffin didn't say anything until we were on the ground, engines spooling down. Then he just sat there a second, looking at his own hands like he was checking whether they were shaking, which they were, slightly. That was closer than the passengers know, he said. That was Tuesday, I said. He looked at me like he was recalculating something. There's a line in your file at the firm. Operational risk, materially mitigated by pilot-in-command competence. I always figured that was boilerplate. Somebody's standard sentence for every regional captain. It's not boilerplate. No, he said slowly. I'm starting to understand that. I didn't tell him the last board packet Tucker prepared for the safety committee had listed the Aspen route as a candidate for outsourcing to a charter partner, to save on training costs. I didn't tell him I'd killed that proposal myself, quietly, the same way I kill most things that would get somebody hurt to save somebody else money. Some secrets I was still keeping even from the man who already knew more of them than my own family did. 3 nights later, Griffin and I got stuck in the same ground stop in Amarillo again, this time for real weather, a line of supercells stacked from Lubbock to the Panhandle. We ended up sharing the crew room's one good couch and the same broken vending machine, arguing about whether the airline should retire the last of the Dash Ace. They're 22 years old, he said. They're paid off, I said. You'll pry that maintenance record out of my cold, dead hands. That's oddly specific. I'm an oddly specific person. He actually laughed, not the polite corporate laugh I get from everyone else in that building. For a second he looked younger than the guy who'd walked in 6 weeks ago asking pointed questions about hangar lights. Then a radar update came through on his laptop and his face went careful again. Can I ask you something and you tell me if it's out of line, he said. Depends on the something. Your family gives you a hard time. I've been here 6 weeks and I've watched it happen 4 separate times. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the radar, like it was easier that way. I don't understand how you land this airline safely at 2 in the morning, and then go sit at a dinner table where somebody tells you to stay in your lane. Nobody had ever said it back to me like that. Flat and plain, like a fact instead of a feeling I was supposed to just swallow. Because the airline needs me more than the dinner table does, I said, and I decided a long time ago I could live without the dinner table. He looked at me, and for 1 second the careful thing dropped off his face completely. If you were ever in real trouble, he said, not weather trouble, the other kind, I'd want to know before you decided you could handle that alone too. I told him I'd keep it in mind. I didn't tell him how close he'd already come to being right. 2 weeks after that ground stop, Tucker pulled me off the Denver to Aspen route, the one I've flown for 6 years, the one with terrain I know better than my own apartment, and reassigned me to puddle jumpers between Denver and Cheyenne. He framed it as a favor. Shorter hours, he said. More time to help Mom with gala planning. You're welcome. I found out from a printed schedule taped to the crew room wall, same as everybody else. Griffin found me in the parking garage afterward, sitting in my car with the engine off, not driving anywhere. That route needs a captain who knows the terrain cold, he said, sliding into the passenger seat without asking. I read the incident reports. Half the carriers flying Aspen approaches have had a near miss in the last 2 years. You haven't had one in 6. He's punishing me for existing in a boardroom he doesn't control yet. I know. I can't even say that out loud to anyone who'd believe me. I believe you, he said. It was such a plain, unglamorous thing to say that it earned something Tucker's whole speech at the all-staff meeting hadn't managed to touch. For what it's worth. Somebody official is on the record now, me. I didn't cry. I want that on the record too. But I sat in a parking garage with a near stranger who apparently believed me more than my own family did, and something in my chest loosened half an inch for the first time in longer than I could remember. Here's what actually happened 3 years ago, the part my parents still don't know. Tucker was running interim operations that spring while Dad recovered from pneumonia. The same quarter our fuel hedges went bad and a regional competitor undercut half our charter contracts. Callaway Air was 6 weeks from missing payroll. Tucker's answer was a memo I found by accident on the shared drive titled, with no irony at all, Cost Deferral Opportunities. Item 4 was scheduled maintenance on the Dash 8 fleet. He wanted to push the C-checks back 4 months to preserve cash. I called Earl Jennings, our director of maintenance, myself at 11 that night, not to report Tucker, to ask if it was survivable. Technically, within limits maybe? Earl told me, and I could hear him hating every word of it. I wouldn't put my own kid on one of those tails past October, if I'm honest with you. My hands were shaking a little when I hung up, not from fear of getting caught. From how easy it would have been to just let it go, sign nothing, ask nothing, and let 30 other pilots keep flying planes that were, technically, within limits, maybe. I funded the deferred maintenance myself the next morning, out of an account I'd been quietly building since flight school for exactly this reason, so money would never be the thing deciding whether a plane was safe. Nobody signed off on it because nobody knew it happened. Tucker's memo just quietly stopped mattering. He thinks to this day that corporate found emergency financing through some contact of Dad's. He has never once asked why the maintenance got done anyway. He has never once wondered why he didn't get in trouble for trying to skip it. I didn't set up Lightkeeper Holdings to save the company. I set it up because my brother was willing to let passengers fly on planes he wouldn't put his own kid on, and somebody in this family had to be willing to actually pay for the difference between technically legal and safe. That's the part nobody claps for. That's not a bonus check or a corner office, that's just Tuesday if you're me. The gala is 11 weeks out now. Tucker's started counting it down out loud at dinner like a rocket launch. My mother started calling it Tucker's night instead of the anniversary. Just his. Griffin's fleet modernization vote is scheduled for the same board cycle, 3 weeks before the gala, 2 very different clocks ticking down to the same room. I hadn't planned to let them collide. Lightkeeper has stayed quiet for 3 years for a real reason. The structure technically requires it, to keep the rescue capital from becoming a bargaining chip for creditors who'd smell blood the second they knew Callaway Air had a deep-pocketed backer. But mostly I stayed quiet because I didn't want to find out what my family would do with the truth. Would they finally see me? Or would they just recalculate exactly how much more they could ask me to give up, now that they knew there was more where it came from? I didn't get to keep deciding on my own timeline, somebody else decided it for me. I wasn't in the room for this part. I've had to piece it together since, the way you piece together a crash from the black box instead of memory, but I know enough now to tell it straight. Tucker Calloway didn't like the way the new ops director looked at the trust documents. He'd caught Griffin in the finance office twice after hours, once with the Lightkeeper Covenant file open on the shared screen, and Tucker didn't buy the explanation about routine fleet financing due diligence for 1 second. Some outside entity had veto rights buried in Callaway Air's capital structure, rights nobody had exercised in 3 years, and Tucker had convinced himself whoever held them was circling the company right before his coronation. "I want it gone before October," he told Dale Winthrop, the family's outside counsel, over stake he barely touched. "Whatever leverage this Lightkeeper thing has, I want a clean vote. I want the board looking at me, not some anonymous account nobody's ever met." Winthrop had a way of nodding that made bad ideas sound like due diligence. "There's a procedural window," he said. "The original rescue agreement has a notice clause. If the trustee doesn't respond to a buyout offer inside 30 days, the board can proceed on simple majority instead of unanimous consent." He didn't mention that doesn't respond could be engineered. He didn't have to. Tucker had already understood. "Draft it," Tucker said. "And Dale, make sure whatever notice we're required to send doesn't actually reach anybody who'd know what to do with it." Winthrop smiled the way lawyers smile right before they decide not to remember a conversation. "I found out about the notice clause by accident, the same way I find out about most things that matter in this family. Not because anyone told me. Because I was standing in the wrong doorway at the right time. I didn't say anything. I've gotten very good at not saying anything. Instead, I went and found Griffin in the hangar, past midnight, doing a walk-around on a Dash 8 that didn't need one, the way people do when they need their hands busy and their head quiet." "Rough night?" "Rough month," he said, not looking up from the landing gear. "Somebody's trying to make a piece of paper disappear before it matters. I don't love watching it happen and not being able to say anything yet." Yet, he agreed, and something in how he said it made me go still. It was the exact rhythm of a note I've read 100 times, tucked in a drawer I don't let anyone else open. Most people wait to be told the plane is already grounded. He hadn't said those words, but he'd said it in the same voice. "For what it's worth," he said, straightening up, "whoever's on the other end of that piece of paper, I don't think they're going to lose. I've read the file. Whoever set that trust up thought through every single way this company could fail, 4 years before it almost did." He looked at me a second too long again, the same look from 6 weeks ago in the ready room. "That's not luck. That's somebody who loves this airline more than her own name on the masthead." "Her," he said, "her." I didn't correct him and he didn't explain how he'd landed on it, and we both stood there under my grandfather's light, not saying the thing we were suddenly circling. Griffin started showing up to my Sunday maintenance log ritual without being asked, which is its own kind of courtship if you grew up in hangars instead of restaurants. I do inventory on the spare parts every Sunday afternoon, mostly because Earl taught me how when I was 14, and it still calms me down more than anything a therapist has ever suggested. He brought real coffee that first Sunday, not the gas station kind, and didn't ask why I count torque wrenches for fun. "You know, the ops director doesn't technically need to reconcile socket sizes," he said, handing me a clipboard anyway. "You know, the ops director doesn't technically need to be here at all on a Sunday." "Yeah," he said, "I noticed that about myself too." We worked in mostly comfortable quiet after that, a thing I didn't know I'd been missing until I had it, somebody willing to just exist next to me without needing me to perform being fine. Around 4 he found a box of my grandfather's old logbooks in the back of the parts closet and asked, careful like he already suspected it mattered, if he could look. He wrote in the margins, Griffin said, turning pages slow, "Fuel, fuel, fuel, stubbornness. Same 4 words, different dates, for 30 years. That was his whole philosophy of running an airline. It's not bad. He looked up. For what it's worth, I don't think stubbornness skips generations in this family. I think it just changes what it's stubborn about. I didn't have a joke ready for that one. I let it sit there instead, between the torque wrenches and 40 years of my grandfather's handwriting, and for the length of one Sunday afternoon I didn't think once about $11,000 or 36 months or any of the things I usually carry into every room I walk into. 2 weeks before the board vote, Tucker called an all-staff briefing to align everyone ahead of the gala. He stood at the podium, in the same hangar that keeps my grandfather's light burning, and told 40 employees that Callaway Air was finally getting real leadership instead of a rotating cast of pilots and mechanics playing family business. Someone laughed, not many, Earl Jennings didn't. He looked over at me the way you look at somebody who just got hit and is doing a very good job pretending they didn't feel it. Afterward, Tucker found me by the coffee station, writing the high of his own speech. "Don't sulk," he said, not quite quiet enough. "You know what I meant. You're a pilot, Nora, a great one. But you fly the plane. I'm going to own the plane. There's a difference, and it's not an insult to say it out loud." "It's not an insult," I said, "it's just not true." He laughed like I'd made a joke. "Sure it is. Name one decision, one you've ever made for this company that mattered more than a flight plan." I looked at him a long moment. I thought about $11,000. I thought about 36 months. I thought about a -8 tail number he tried to fly past its maintenance window with somebody's kid strapped into 14C. "Ask me again after the gala," I said, and walked away before he could see what it cost me to keep my voice level. Griffin was standing by the hangar door. He'd heard all of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. It was the first time in 3 years anybody besides Earl Jennings had looked at me like they knew exactly how much I was carrying, and were furious on my behalf instead of asking me to carry more. The notice was supposed to go to Lightkeeper's registered agent, a small corporate services office in Wilmington that exists mostly on paper. Dale Winthrop sent it, technically, exactly the way the covenant required. He sent it to an address he'd quietly confirmed had changed 2 years earlier, to a version of the agent's name that hadn't been correct since a routine filing update Griffin's firm made and never bothered to publicize. I only know this because Griffin found it, a discrepancy in the corporate registry that took him 4 sleepless nights to run down, the kind of thing you only notice if you're looking at every document like it might be lying to you, which by then we both were. "They're going to argue," never responded. He told me, printouts spread across his kitchen table at 1 in the morning, his voice flat in the specific way people get flat right before they either cry or start solving the problem. "If the board takes it at face value, it's a simple majority vote. Tucker gets to unwind the covenant, strip Lightkeeper's board seat rights, and do it before anyone even knows there was a fight." "Can you prove the notice was sent wrong on purpose?" "I can prove it was sent wrong. Proving it was on purpose is a different problem, and we don't have 30 days to solve it the honest way." He looked up. "Whoever's behind Lightkeeper needs to respond directly, on the record, before the board meeting. Otherwise in 9 days, on paper, they stop existing." 9 days. 3 years of proof, a hangar light, 36 wire transfers, 1 maintenance record I paid for out of my own signing bonus so a plane wouldn't hurt anybody, and it was about to disappear because a lawyer addressed an envelope wrong on purpose. I sat in Griffin Voss's kitchen at 1 in the morning and understood, with a clarity I hadn't let myself have before, that I was completely out of ways to stay hidden and still win. I flew 4 Cheyenne round trips that week on almost no sleep, because grounded planes don't care whose family is falling apart, and a regional insurance conference still needed its attendees on time. I have never once called in sick to protect a secret. I wasn't about to start 12 hours before it stopped being 1. I decided that night, not in anger. In the quiet, arithmetic way I decide everything that actually matters. Earl's face at the all-staff meeting, Tucker's memo from 3 years ago, my mother's hand patting mine like a consolation prize, a hangar light nobody in my family has ever asked me about. 9 days, I was done being the reason this company survived and the last person in the room anyone thought to protect. I didn't call a lawyer first, I called Griffin. "I need Lightkeeper Holdings to respond on the record," I said. "Tonight, if it can be tonight." A pause on the line, the kind with weight to it. "You know who runs Lightkeeper," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've known for 3 years," I said. "I run it." He didn't say anything for so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, gone quiet in a way I'd never heard from him. Most people wait to be told the plane is already grounded. "You didn't." I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. "That's a very specific thing to say me right now, Griffin." "I know," he said. "G.V. Griffin Voss. I've been signing your wire confirmations for 3 years, Nora, and the file's blind on my end too. Case 4471, I've never once had your name. I asked to run this operational review myself instead of sending an analyst, because for 3 years I read your notes and I wanted to see in person, what kind of person authorizes a de-icing fund increase 2 weeks before her own board even votes on it. My partners thought it was strange. I didn't care. I didn't know it was you until about 11 seconds ago, and I need you to know I am not currently breathing correctly. Neither was I. 3 years of a stranger's voice in 2-line notes, and it had been standing in the hangar with me the whole time, asking about a light bulb on his first morning, like he already suspected the truth was bigger than a company tradition. We don't have time to be stunned, I finally said, because somebody in this conversation had to be the pilot. 9 days. Tell me what Lightkeeper needs to do. Show up, he said, in person, at the board meeting. Before anyone can argue, notice wasn't received, because the trustee walks in the door and hands them the response herself. They'll see my face. Nora. My name cracked on his voice in a way I felt in my sternum. They're going to see it eventually either way. I'd rather they see it on your terms than Dale Winthrop's. The board meeting got moved up to the afternoon of the gala once Winthrop realized the 30-day window closed that same week, a coincidence he clearly hadn't planned and clearly didn't love. Which meant I walked into the hotel's mezzanine boardroom in the very building where, 6 hours later, my father was supposed to announce Tucker as CEO in front of 300 guests and a photographer from the Regional Business Journal. Tucker didn't see me come in. He was 3 sentences into resolving the Lightkeeper situation cleanly before we moved forward as a family when Griffin opened the door, and I walked through it in my Callaway Air Captain's uniform, 4 stripes on each sleeve, 'cause I wanted every person at that table to see exactly who they were looking at. Sorry I'm late, I said. I had a flight this morning. My father's face did something I will remember for the rest of my life, confusion sliding into something else, something that hadn't fully arrived yet. Nora, this is a closed session, Tucker said, already reaching for damage control. Whatever this is. I'm the trustee of record for Lightkeeper Holdings, I said. I'm here to respond to the notice. In person, on the record. Since the copy that was mailed apparently went to an address your counsel confirmed was outdated 2 years ago. I set a folder on the table. Griffin had helped me build it over 4 sleepless nights. The covenant, the wire history, 36 months of confirmations. And, at the very back, a maintenance deferral memo from 3 years ago, with my handwritten authorization to fund the C-checks myself, dated the same week Tucker told Earl Jennings the fleet could wait. Nobody said anything for a full 10 seconds. In a boardroom, 10 seconds is a long time. Tucker recovered first, the way he always does, reaching for the tone that's worked on every teacher, coach, and junior associate his whole life. This is absurd. Some pilot's side business doesn't just override a corporate notice period because she walked in wearing a costume. It's not a costume. Griffin hadn't said a word since opening the door, and his voice carried the same flat, immovable calm I'd heard in his kitchen at 1 a.m. It's a captain's uniform. She's also, as of about 11 seconds ago, on the record, the majority beneficial owner of the entity your legal counsel just tried to write out of this meeting. I'd choose the next sentence carefully, Tucker. Tucker didn't have a next sentence. For possibly the first time in his adult life, my brother was out of things to say, and the silence he left behind was the loudest sound I had heard in that building in 31 years. That's not possible, my mother said quietly, and I understood, watching her face, that some small mean part of her had been hoping it wasn't. It's been possible for 3 years, I said. You just never asked. I want to say I felt triumphant. Mostly I just felt tired. The specific tired of finally setting down something heavy you've carried so long you forgot your arms could ache from anything else. Tucker found his voice last, and it came out smaller than I had ever heard it. You let me think. He stopped, started again, the maintenance thing. 3 years ago. You knew what I tried to do. I did the C-checks myself, I said, out of my own account. So the planes you were willing to fly on a shortcut would still be safe for everyone who wasn't you. That was the moment Earl Jennings, who'd been asked to attend as the maintenance representative, set down the folder he'd been holding this whole time. The original safety audit from 3 years ago. The one Griffin's team had spent 4 nights confirming was authentic and complete, the one that named, in Tucker's own signature, exactly whose decision it had been to defer those inspections. Wasn't my place to start a war over a memo, Earl said not unkindly, mostly just done. But I wasn't about to let it disappear either. Figured someday somebody'd need it filed properly instead of buried. One of the outside board members, a woman named Carol Ashby who'd sat quietly through a decade of family arguments at that table without once taking a side, finally spoke. I'd like it on the record that I move we formally recognize Captain Calloway's operational judgment in the maintenance matter, given it appears to have prevented what could have been a reportable safety incident. Nobody seconded it fast enough to be polite about how badly the room had needed someone to say it out loud. The board didn't need 30 days to decide what they thought about the rest of it. They needed about 4 minutes, a motion, and a second. By the time they finished voting, to preserve Lightkeeper's covenant rights, to open a formal safety review into the 3-year-old maintenance deferral, to suspend Tucker from any unilateral operational authority pending that review, and to refer Dale Winthrop's handling of the notice to outside ethics counsel, it was 5 o'clock, and 300 guests were already arriving downstairs for a gala my father no longer knew how to open. He found me in the stairwell instead of the ballroom, still in my uniform, because there hadn't been a single spare minute to change. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said, not angry, just quiet the way he gets when something's actually landed instead of just registered. "Because for 3 years I wanted to be loved for something other than what I could give this family," I said. "And I was scared that if you knew you'd finally see me, but only because of the money. Not because I've been flying your planes safely through every kind of weather this state can produce for 11 years, while you called it staying in my lane." He didn't have a smooth answer for that. My father has never once in his life been without a smooth answer. Watching him not have one was its own kind of apology. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About the lane. About all of it." "I know," I said. "You're going to say that again tonight, by the way. In front of everyone. Not the money part that stays quiet, the way it's always been, but the rest of it." He did. He tried to hand me something before he left the stairwell for the ballroom, an envelope, already prepared, weeks old by the look of the creases. A number on it meant to make up for $11,000 and every bonus before it. I didn't take it. "I don't need you to pay me back," I said. "I needed you to notice. Those aren't the same currency, and I'm done pretending they are." He put the envelope away. It was, possibly, the first time in his life my father had been told no by someone he couldn't simply outwait, and something in his face suggested he understood exactly what he was looking at. I don't know exactly what my father told 300 guests at the podium that night, because I stepped out to the terrace before he started, Griffin's jacket over my shoulders, since I still hadn't found anything nicer to change into than a captain's uniform. But I heard the applause change partway through, the polite kind sliding into the real kind, and later my mother found me outside and said, without any of her usual careful phrasing, he told them the truth. That the person who kept this airline alive isn't the one they were about to put on a stage. He didn't say Lightkeeper. "No," she agreed, "but he said your name. Both times when it mattered, he said your name." I found Griffin in Hangar 2 an hour later. Some nights only make sense from underneath the light my grandfather started keeping 50 years ago, for exactly this reason, so the ones flying home late through something rough would have proof somebody was still awake for them. He'd changed out of his suit into the same worn flight jacket he wears on ground stops, standing under the lamp like he'd known I would end up here before I did. "Good speech?" he asked. "He said my name twice," I said. "That's more than the last 30 years combined." He reached over and brushed his thumb once, gently, along my jaw, the kind of gesture that isn't asking for anything, just confirming something's real. "Lightkeeper Holdings," he said. "You named a rescue trust after a light bulb you've been personally keeping on since you were 22. I named it after the only thing in this family that never once asked me to be smaller to deserve it." We stood there a while, not saying much else, which is its own kind of luxury after a day like that one. I didn't have to earn my place at that table tonight. Nobody asked me to give anything up. For the first time in 31 years, that was simply true, and it hadn't cost me a single dollar to make it so. The light was still burning when we finally walked out, it always. I just don't have to be the only one watching for it anymore. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.